So, folks, this is quite a young lady, if you ask me. Um, and she is a good friend. And no, I don't know them all that well. I just know them through a couple of encounters. I know her dad a lot better, but he was the president of the denomination that I joined, that is the Association of Free Lutheran Congregations, many years ago. And so I kind of knew her through her dad, but then I did a workshop in Minnesota in which I definitely got to know her a lot better. And so Amy and her husband Josh serve a Lutheran church in the Chicago area, correct?
Yep.
And now I'm going to say their last name for you, okay? It's Amy Skogerboe. Skogerboe.
There you go.
Skogerboe.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. And Josh, I apologize about that. Anyway, so Amy is a young lady who has had some mental health challenges in her life and is just a very real person and a Christian and loves the Lord, and has a Jesus Sister Talk once a week online. And so I want to give you the opportunity to hear her, and I'm going to shut up and just ask you to talk for a little bit and carry it on, Amy, and say hi to everybody. These are our peeps. This is our tribe of people. And in the meantime, I'm going to let the Fresh Hope folks know where we're at. So.
Okay, sounds good. First of all, I just want to keep being on here to be called young lady. I'm staying around for that.
Well, definitely.
Keep saying it.
Yes.
Whole part of my life. The one thing that I want to share with you guys right out of the gate is that I am one who has this component of anxiety and depression as a part of who I am, as a part of my life, as a part of my physiology. And for his purposes, and I trust this, when I prayed for that to be removed from my life, that was not the way that God chose to act in my life. Do I know that he could? Absolutely. I know that, and I believe that to my core, that if he chose to lift this part, this component of who I am. But what I prayed back, 15, almost 20 years ago, I bet, when I prayed about this part of my life, I had that sense when I knew that God wasn't going to heal it and remove it. I had this strong conviction in my life, and I covenanted with the Lord that if it was going to be a part of my human experience here, I prayed, Lord, use it. Don't waste it. Don't allow this just to be a pointless aspect of pain in my life, but use it in some way for me to see people better, to see people better, to care more deeply about other wounded, broken people in my life, which, if you know about the topic of depression and anxiety, that's a huge percentage of the masses that are out there. And I was like, Lord, please use it to do something through me that has value. So when Brad was asking about me coming on and talking about this part of my life, I want you all to know I don't do this very often. And I do some different speaking, but I don't very often speak about the anxiety and depression component because, for one, I'm not an expert. Brad has spent a great deal more time, obviously, developing expertise in this area.
No,
and
I've
for me,
been sick longer.
yes. Again, at the point that I prayed, Lord, use this in my life. When Brad asked, that was really my conviction, was I believe this is another way that God will use this. So it's worth raising my voice, showing my face, and saying, yeah, this is it. This is a face of depression and anxiety. And please, Lord, my prayer right now is use this to bring value to someone who's listening. And for that, it is worth it.
Absolutely. On the little intro on Amy's page, it says Jesus girl, proud 5-boy mom, and tattooed pastor's wife, and passionate and grateful business owner and team leader. So you just don't seem like the kind of person who has depression. So talk to me about that, because it's in direct contrast to your personality type, right?
Yep. And Brad, one thing that I found about that over the years too is there are so many misconceptions about what the face of depression is. And those that have confided in me that they suffer from it, I can't tell you how many times I've said, no way, no way. And the fact that people who have confided that in me without knowing that that's a part of my story, I very readily share in return, yes, actually, I do understand that that's a part of who I am. And I get that same response from them, just deadpan, like, no way.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's something to that as a believer that I think that you've tapped on there is I am committed to being a life of joy, to living a life of joy. And it isn't something I have to wring out of my dead and tired soul. It is something that I pray would flow through me. My personality, my humor that you hear when I speak, any kind of partial wittiness that might come through in any given moment, those are components of my life that are preserved by the Father.
Yeah.
That when I have anxiety and depression, I think there's a definite misconception and there's a lie of the enemy that you have to surrender those parts of your life. You will not any longer express yourself with humor and passion and joy. And you're going to be a certain kind of a Debbie Downer personality that hides under bed sheets for the majority of the day. And that isn't what God has done in Amy
Yeah.
Skogerboe. And I'm grateful for that. I have my moments where I am shut down, dysfunctional. But for those of us who are believers who have lived with this for a considerable amount of time, I hope it is incredible encouragement and validation for you to realize that your component of depression or anxiety does not dictate who you are when it comes to what you bring to the table. You can bring incredible, authentic, God preserved, protected, fueled joy.
Well,
And if you and I don't prove that, Brad, between the combination of the two of us, I'm not going to convince anybody beyond that.
yeah, I
Is
suspect
it easy? Is
that's
it easy?
probably
Just
true.
say that.
Yeah,
Is
and
it easy? Yeah.
just because you have depression does not mean you lose your sense of humor.
Right.
It doesn't mean you lose your personality. It doesn't mean, and the thing is that no more than somebody who has cancer and they've got their bad days where they're sick in bed and it's bad.
Right.
But they have a lot of good days too. And the same is true. And they don't say, I am cancer, you
Right.
know, they don't say, I am, this disease. No, there's much more to them than that. And certainly we can't lose ourselves and who God made us to be. So there are some very happy, upbeat people that have depression.
Yeah.
And humor is one of the things that gets them through. When you think about a lot of the folks who are comedians have depression and anxiety. So tell me how each of those things shows up and how they play hand in glove in your life. How do they show up symptomatically?
Okay. So what does depression look like for me? Is that kind of what you're
Mm-hmm.
okay? So I would say this goes back all the way to when I was a teenager. And a lot of women, I can't speak for men because I'm not one. But
And you don't even play one on TV or anything?
Never.
Okay.
What a lot of the women that I know of in my life have talked about, it's closely related to our hormones. And so I would say from the age of 16 going into 18, we always hear you're going to be kind of sad. You're going to deal with, your monthly stuff and all that kind of stuff. And I went through that. And there's a message out there that that's normal. And indeed it is. It is. But when I started hitting the ages of 18, 20, 22, and I would say I was experiencing life. It was interesting. The way that I've described it is when I would have real happy moments, there was always like I would have this moment and then there was this cloud that would follow closely behind it. And I never was able to really grasp those emotions of joy and stay in that moment. I remember as a young mom, one of the poignant examples that I've used is my husband would sit and play drums with our little boys. And I would go, oh, this is so special. And then I'd be like, oh, I felt like I was like else. I was kind of apart from it. And my natural like mood and mind would tend towards the negative and tend towards sad. And I looked at Brad, I did everything through those early years of my 20s and parenting. I mean, we knew how to affect the lighting in the room, and we knew that I needed a cup of coffee and I was going to kind of chill out in the corner and this kind of stuff. And we did all of these managing skills with my emotions and my sadness until I got into my early 30s. And I started having panic attacks. I had an administrative role at a school that I was teaching in, and there was just a lot of pressure. I was doing a lot of public speaking. I was just doing a lot of things where it put me at a podium. And the nerves that came with that and everything. And it got to the point where I was standing at the mic once, doing a training for some administrators, and I had my very first panic attack standing at the mic.
Oh,
and
wow.
up until that point of life, I had managed it like, oh, my emotions are just kind of funky. I don't think I ever used the word depression. But looking back now, I definitely was dealing with both anxiety and depression. And I wish I would have like put my finger on that a lot earlier. But when I came to this point where I had a very public panic attack standing up front, fortunately, there was a Jesus sister, older woman in the room that followed me out because I had to excuse myself and step out. I didn't know if I was going to throw up, pass out. I didn't know if I was going to hit the floor. I didn't know what was happening.
Did you know what it was at the time?
I didn't know what it was, no.
Okay.
But what happened was I stepped out of the room, and this lady who knew me well and had dealt with panic attacks followed me out and said, Amy, are you nervous right now? And I said, you know what? I'm not that nervous. And I've done this like a lot of times before. I'd even given that same talk before. And she said, you know what? I didn't think you were. She said, I think I know what's happening.
Wow.
And as she told me what it's like when it happens to her, it was a God thing, but it was step by step exactly what I was experiencing in a way that she could not have inferred just in normal conversation. I knew as she shared that what she explained was what happened to me internally. And so at that point, and this is one thing for all of you that are listening as well too, at that point that I knew I was having panic attacks, my wheels were going, I am not okay. All right. And part of my personality is a little bit of attitude. Which fits. It fits when you live in Chicago, okay?
Yes. Yeah. I like it.
It didn't fit as well in the Midwest, in Minnesota.
Especially as a free Lutheran.
Right? It didn't play out so well with the stoic Norwegians.
Yes. Yeah.
But
they're kind of quiet.
My hood in Chicago, I blend a little better on the attitude part. And the way that has served me in this part of my life was really crucial, because at the point that I realized that I wasn't okay, that's a lot for a lot of people. That's where it stops. That's where the story stops, and they start to hide. People can't know all the stigma that's attached to it. What will they think if they see me? What all this stuff. And you know what? I just flat out didn't have that. I knew I needed help, and you couldn't have stopped me if you tried.
Yeah.
And the other thing that helped in that regard was I had no fear of medication, Brad.
That's
I
good thing.
didn't. I'm
Yep.
not careless about it, and I'm not callous about it, but I have a husband who's diabetic,
Mm-hmm.
and he has to inject something every day in order for him to be functional and to be healthy. And so that concept for me, I didn't worry when I went to the doctor. I laid out exactly what I was feeling. I wasn't worried if my in-laws knew that I was going to the doctor, if my mom and dad knew that I didn't invite other people into that conversation to give me their opinions at that point. And I think that's really crucial. When you know that you need help, you got to go. You got to own that moment, and you got to go. And I remember someone had said to me, a gal that I taught in my church, again, an older Jesus sister who saw this going on in my life, who stopped me and said, "You will be okay, Amy. The reason I know that is because I know who you belong to." And I
Yeah.
love her for that. It's her name's Faith Nelson, Brad. I don't know if you know
Oh,
Eldon
sure.
and Faith,
Yeah. No, I know Faith. Yeah.
right? So you can see those, you can imagine those words coming out of her mouth. But she said, "Amy, you're not okay right now, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You will be okay because I know who holds you. However, you have to be willing to go through the process to get okay." And
Yep.
for those of you where medication is a part of that, or therapy is a part of that, whatever it is, those components that bring you to a place of greater stability, my word would be, don't be afraid of it. And she had said to me too, the first person that you go to may not provide the right answer. You got to be willing to stay the course,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Because this is your life that you're talking about, and this is the way that you're going to experience your life emotionally. So stay
Mhm.
the course. If they suggest medication, you may need to go through a few different changes before they find what works for you, depending on what ails you, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
I went into it giving myself an enormous amount of grace and freedom to just get well.
Great.
And if there's anything that you would even take from my experience at all, that might be it. Would be, don't be afraid of what other people think. Own your process and do what it takes. There are a lot of people out there living with depression and anxiety that are hiding. And the greatest definer between them and me is simply that they haven't owned it
Yep.
and
Yep.
entered into it. And you know what? I am not, there were a lot of young women that I counseled that fought the fact that they have depression. They
Mm.
fought it. And within the church, you find that even more, Brad. Am I right? That people are
Yeah.
like, wait,
People see it as
faith.
a
What about
character
faith?
flaw. Yeah. They see it
Faith,
as a faith issue or a character
faith issue.
issue, or,
Right?
you just need to pull up your bootstraps.
And that's where my attitude came in again. Was I knew I was a woman of faith.
Yep.
And that's not between me and any other single woman on earth to quantify how much of a woman of faith is she. Right? That's between me and the Lord.
Yep.
And that question is resolved right there. So that wasn't even on the table for discussion. Now it was, okay, as a woman of faith, I am acknowledging that this part of my physiology is broken. And now I'm going to take ownership of that between me and the Lord. I'm going to, I don't like the word embrace when it comes to depression because it looks like you're kind of grabbing onto it, but I'm going to accept it. I'm going to accept that as part of my experience here. I'm not going to fight it violently and make myself even more anxious and depressed. I'm going to get help. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to get help. And I'm
Yep.
going to figure out how to live with this, knowing at any moment it might be lifted. And some months and some years are easier, and some things with over time. Have I had some healing? Absolutely, I've had some
Sure.
healing. Do I know that that still exists in my makeup? Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's no
yeah,
different than if you said, okay, I have diabetes, therefore I am less of a Christian, or I,
right.
or now one of the things that I'd like to go back to was when you described depression for you, it was always kind of that looming dark cloud, which I kind of experienced anxiety that way and panic as that kind of just waiting for something terrible to happen. And I have found through the years that depression for me sometimes is not necessarily sadness, but just no feeling at all, just blah, just
Okay.
absolutely blah. So, I mean, everybody can experience it so differently, but the one thing that we don't need to have the same experience on, and we can all have the same experience on, is to just get help when you need help,
Right.
to just do it, right?
Right.
That's that's really what you're saying is we experience it differently, but everybody can decide to just go get help when you need help,
Right.
and own it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had a good friend who went through it, the panic attack part, like a sudden onset of anxiety and everything in her probably late 30s.
Hmm.
And I remember she reached out to me and she said, Amy, today is the first day that I have true empathy for how you experience life.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But the one thing she said to me, what I said, are you okay with me? Like, can we talk about it? Are you open to that yet? Or is it still too, intense? And
Uh-huh.
she just laid out a really clear guideline with me. She said, Amy, I need this one thing from you. When you talk to me about it, don't tell me that I'll be medicated forever. She said, don't tell me that this won't go away. Because she said, I know you're still medicated. And for those of you who are on here now, I'm on 15, 16 years of being medicated with that steadying amount in my system that works for me.
Hmm.
And you know what, Brad, it was a good word to me to be like, God doesn't lead any two people through this. And you know what? She didn't have to stay on medication. She
Hmm.
actually experienced this in such a way that she was able to wean off that pretty quickly. And that's where, when we do talk about this part of life, it's so important to understand that what I feel or what you feel, or like if I experience it as this weight of sadness, or if it makes somebody, for me, it made me also, my mind would really race. I'd lay down at night and be like, oh, I'm just crazy. I'm crazy. Like what's going on inside my head right now, nobody knows what that feels like. And you need to hear me when you say, you know what? That's not true.
Hmm.
There are a lot of us whose minds go just wonkers.
Hmm. And the thing is that it depends with medicine and how the Lord does it, and aging changes us. And
Absolutely.
um, the other thing is that it depends too what it is in particular that's wrong with the brain.
Right.
Um, Depression and anxiety are more likely to be things where you don't have to be medicated the rest of your life. There's a fairly good chance that you might not be. Whereas I have bipolar disorder, most likely I'm going to be. At least I'm going to have to do a mood stabilizer, and usually people get themselves in trouble if they think that, they
Mm-hmm.
wean themselves off. No one should ever do that without their doctor's, blessing and
Right.
participation in it. But yeah, and if that was important for her to not hear, it was probably a good thing you didn't say, well, sister, you're going to have to take that pill and swallow it.
Right. Right. Because I didn't know. I
Yeah.
didn't know what her experience was going to be, but I do realize, and some of you might acknowledge this too, is when you do find out you need medication, for a lot of people, their singular focus becomes, how do I wean myself off? Because
Yep.
then I feel like I moved on in my life, or I succeed. Success for them is getting off of that medication. And I think it's a good word to just put out there that that isn't the case for everybody. And however it is that God leads and provides, that's your story. And that's where you accept it. And my story is that continually needs to be a part of my system. And I know it.
Yep.
I know it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
One word for those of you, a Christian woman. This was really important to me. Brad was an example of someone openly addressing mental health. But how many of you who are on here, where I can see a few faces, know who Sheila Walsh is from Women of Faith? Just stick your hand up for just a second if you do. Okay. So when I was in my 20s, I heard her one night. I was out in the car in my driveway, and I drove away from home just so I could hear the whole talk. But she was probably the first believer that I heard come forward and talk about what it was to live with depression as a believer. And she had been on the 700 Club, and she took so much heat for coming forward. But I remember her just saying too, there's a blue pill that I need every day, and I take it when I travel, and I'm in ministry, and I'm going to continue to do ministry, but this is a part of who I am, and I want that out there to encourage others who have that same experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, Brad, from the women of faith specifically, they are these women that are close to the heart of God, and when they speak, you listen. There's something different there. Am I right? When you hear them talk, you're like, oh man, she knows Jesus. Okay. And that's a lot of them that have spoken for that. Well, I stepped back during that time of my life when I was examining my own brokenness, and I looked at theirs. Those women that were up there speaking, there were some that were dealing with brain cancer. One of those gals had, I think it was Chuck Swindoll, was it his sister that was on there at the time that was one of the speakers?
Lucy.
I might have the wrong
Lucy
speaker, but yes. And she was, I can't remember if she was the one, but one of the gals that was on there was talking about having lost 2 or 3 of her sons. Okay. And 2 of those sons 1 year apart. And the women that I saw in my life, Brad, that were coming out just pouring out Jesus Christ powerfully, that really that I could look at and say, okay, that is somebody that knows the Father. They dealt with incredible stuff behind the scenes.
Right.
Incredible stuff. And I started to realize that brokenness in my life may be maybe the primary factor in who I become for Christ and how I live out this life and what I have to say about it.
Yep.
Because my easy, superficial stuff, not too many people are going to care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Easy's overrated. Normal's overrated.
Yeah.
I'm like, it looks to me like the best stories are triumph and victory stories in the face of something big, fat, and ugly. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
And for me, that's that component in my life. It is an obstacle. It is a hurdle. But from the way that I can see God using my life, it's Him walking me through that in spite of it, that speaks to people so much more than any other component of who I am.
Yep.
And if that's my amen for His glory, Brad, I will say to you, brother, it's been worth it. And I think you would say that too.
Oh yeah, I'd much rather have what I have today than to not have gone through what I've gone through, because what I've gone through has made me who I'm supposed to be, as opposed to who I was trying to be.
Right.
I was going to tell you that Sheila Walsh spoke at our fundraising event that we had a couple of years ago, and she's just the real deal, And then I spoke with her at another thing in Texas where we were both keynoters, and so we had to be on the stage together when they were asking questions. And I don't know what I was trying to do. I was getting something out of my pocket while she was talking, and something dropped out of my pocket, and I was sure that it was my hearing aid, and I didn't want to forget it was on the floor. So right then and there, while she was talking, I got down on the floor. We were sitting in some chairs, and I had my rear end to this audience of about 2,000 people. And all of a sudden, Sheila's looking at me. She goes, "Dude, what are you doing down there?" And it suddenly dawned on me, I probably should have waited and tried to remember.
I just think it's so memorable, though.
Yeah, well, it was memorable. But all of those women, like now Lucy Swindoll, I don't think Lucy is married, so I don't think it's probably Lucy who.
She's not the one with the children, but is she possibly the one with brain cancer? Do you know, Donna? Do you remember? Okay, I kind of think that might have been a part of her story, but yeah. I don't want to ascribe that to anybody where it was not.
Well, and Lucy is Chuck Swindoll's sister, and she's such a hoot. and I've gotten to know Chuck Swindoll's daughter, Colleen, real well.
Yes.
And yeah, it's, I think the daughter, Colleen, is a lot like her Aunt Lucy, you know.
Okay.
So, but the thing is that, for instance, Patsy Claremont, who wrote the
Mm,
book, Normal is Just a Setting on Your Dryer.
right.
Um, and God uses crackpots. It really is all about finally that God can't use us when we're, if we're not willing to admit the most broken spots in our life and the deepest hurts that we felt, then what kind of glory does he get? And not that we all have to have some incredible, big, horrible story, but
Right.
part of his redemptive work in our lives is more than just our salvation. It is a redemptive work of our pain and our brokenness and our ongoing struggle in this life, so that he uses that as liquid gold to bring other people to relationship with him. Yeah. So, well, we need to do this again sometime when we can do it on Facebook Live. And somebody said, Kelly wrote, I've heard that our life story is a gift wrapped in barbed wire.
Oh,
And you
interesting.
know, if nothing else, certainly in the barbs from rose bushes, I think.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I've noticed, Brad, too, and I'll just say this by word of closing on my end here, too, is if nothing else had come from this part of my life, and I will tell you so much has come out of this part of my life, but if nothing else had, I don't love people the same way as I used to. I see people now and am drawn to people now that I could easily have overlooked, worse yet, that I may have had an aversion to or shied away from. When you are coasting and all is well, you are not typically quick to enter into other people's pain or the parts of their life that look shaky and uncertain, and depression is definitely one of those. And what I see and know about myself now, and I've also seen this in the life of my kids. If people are saying, Amy, what does this do to your boys? You heard Brad say I'm the mother of 5 boys. Man, my boys are compassionate. They're compassionate. And I have seen God use this and translate this into all different parts of who they are. Even with people with different special needs, not just emotional needs.
Mm-hmm.
My boys aren't afraid of that in the same way.
Yep.
They will, and the words that I've used is they will enter in.
Yep.
They'll enter in. And some of that comes from some really hard moments where mom was sitting on the floor in the living room, crying against a chair in a corner, and one would come over to hug me, and I would say to them when they were really little, Mom's not okay right now, but Mom's gonna be okay. I'm not okay right now, but you need me to hear that I will be.
Mm-hmm.
I will be. I'm feeling things right now, but I will be. And there are people who will say, don't let anybody see that part of your life. It will only do damage. And you know what, Brad? That part of my life has served the kingdom and my family.
Yep.
And I'll proclaim that, because I love differently now. And
Mm-hmm.
so do those that have been close to me as we have walked through this part of the journey. So for those of you that relate to that, or when we talk about these emotions of feeling overwhelmed, feeling crazy, feeling sad, feeling just discombobulated from this whole thing, will you know that God has uprooted your normal and maybe now has you flowing in the stream of the Holy Spirit in a whole different way?
Yeah.
I am now what? Unanchored. What's the word? Uprooted from
Not
normalcy
not
in
unhinged.
a way that allows me to move in the spirit in a completely different way. And with that, I would say there's no better way to live.
Yep.
There's
Yeah.
no better way to live.
When
Broken, but trusting.
yes. Yeah.
Broken, but His.
And not afraid to go and enter into the pigsty with other people's pain.
You got it. Yeah.
And I think that's when you've been through enough storms in life and you realize that storms are scary, storms are difficult, like we're going through right now
Yeah.
as a world, really. They're difficult, but you get through it. And I teach our people it's because we anchor ourselves in such a way. In the shipping world, they call it kedging. And so what you do when you kedge is you anchor behind us, something substantial that's going to hold the ship and go out away from the port during the storm. So your ship is going like this, but you're anchored here. But the catching is that I think is interesting is they keep that taut and they're actually pulling themselves closer and closer to the anchor in order to do that. And so to me, entering into somebody's storm, but staying anchored and hedging is just drawing yourself as well as them closer to the Lord, but also being able to ride out within their storm and not being afraid of being lost at sea, so to speak. But yeah. Well, listen, Amy, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for staying with us no matter what tonight, not being able to get on Facebook Live.
Sure.
Hopefully, folks that see this and are hearing it live right now, but also will see the video later. Hopefully, you know that by next Monday night, I plan on being back and we'll get this figured out how this works with Facebook now, since Facebook's changed it and Zoom probably they'll get it figured out at some point. But we just happen to be right tonight was the time. So thank you, Amy, so much for doing this, and may the Lord bless you for every minute you spent with us. May he bless you at least 1,000 times over.
Thank you.
And yeah, and we'll have you back again. We'll do a podcast too. I think you should do a Fresh Hope podcast for women. I think that'd be great. Yeah, and I have a young lady in El Salvador you need to meet too. You two could be a lot of trouble together. You would stir up the kingdom of hell like nobody's business.
Oh boy.
But anyway, well, thank you everybody for hanging in there with us tonight, and Cammie and Cindy and Donna and Joan and Kelly and Ider, and I'm glad that you're all here. Yeah. And let me close with a word of prayer. Father, I think of St. Paul, who said he prayed for something to be taken away 3-4 times, many times over. And those thorns remained to keep him humble, but I also believe he loved differently and he lived differently because of that. And Lord, I just thank you and praise you that Amy has seen fit early on to say, if I'm going to have this, then Lord, use it. And her willingness to be open about it and to be transparent. Thank you, Lord, for that. Just open up all kinds of avenues and doorways for her to share what you are doing, Lord. And we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. Well, God bless you, everybody. Okay. Thank you. And have a good evening. And we'll see you back on Facebook next week, hopefully. And I'll have another interview. I'm hoping to interview my wife and find out what she learned with going through everything she did with me, what she's learned that helps her get through times like what we're going through right now. And so anyway, bless you all. Okay. Have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.